So it is 32 minutes past 5, and we don't want to keep Denise waiting for very long. She has to go somewhere at 6, she said. So hopefully some participants will be joining in as we go along. This is going to be 19 webinars, mostly based on Steve's school, or hemp school that he gave in 2020. And Steve is probably going to be talking about that today. I want to thank you all, especially you, Dennis, and you, Steve, for making it to this webinar today in person. I'll begin with introductions. I'll begin with myself. My name is Emmanuel Omondi. I have been in Tennessee State University for about a year now. Before that, I worked at the Rodel Institute for 5 years. I was, before I continue, if you're not speaking, could you off your microphone, please? Mute it. So I was saying I worked at Rodel Institute for 5 years. I was running their long-term study that was comparing organic and conventional grain cropping systems. You can grow grains these days in the organic systems without cover crops. Cover crops is biggie, and Steve is just about the best consultant that I've worked with regard to cover crops. I've worked with Steve the whole 5 years I was there, and I'm hoping to continue working with him. And maybe I'll introduce you first. Yeah, I'll have you go first in the way of introduction, Steve, and then we'll go to Dennis, and then if Mitchell, you're hearing me, you will be next.
Yeah, I heard you. Glad to be here tonight. Sorry that I can't be on video, but I'm Mitchell Richmond with the University of Tennessee. I'm the Tobacco, Hemp, and Specialty Crops Extension Specialist. I'm glad to be here, and please feel free to reach out to me if I can help in any way.
Thank you, Mitchell. Steve?
Yep. So, do you want me to go on with my presentation now, or
just introduce yourself?
Okay.
Actually, what we're gonna do is, because Denise has to leave, she can't be here after 6, so we'll actually have her go first. But I just thought that people should know who we are before we get into the
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm Steve Groff from southeastern Pennsylvania. I've been growing hemp since it was legal here in Pennsylvania in 2019, so the last 3 years. And as everybody knows, it's been quite a journey. And I will tell you some stories this evening about that journey. So that's what we're going to have to look forward to.
Thank you. Denise?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Denise Woods. I have the privilege of being the hemp program coordinator for the state of Tennessee. And I'm glad that Steve's going to handle the stories, because I'm sure there's going to be, well, depending on how you define, some good ones. Hemp, everyone has their reason for growing hemp, and along with that comes their journey and their story. So I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome, awesome. Is Anand here?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. Good evening, everyone. This is Anand Kumar. I'm research assistant at Tennessee State University, and I'm involved in hemp research work at Tennessee State University since 2019. And we have seen so many changes. Laws and regulation was one of the most crucial one. We welcome Denise here. She is, I never organized any program with her. It's my privilege to have her here. And let's see how the program, laws, and regulation work in Tennessee, as well as the federal regulation for 2022 also. So we'll see some recap about how the laws was in 2021, and how we can shape and how we can make it more easy for beginning or small farmers in 2022. Thank you all for having me here.
Thank you, Anand. And without further ado, I think the floor is yours now, Dennis. I like your card.
Well, like I said, I want, oh,
Sorry.
there he is.
Oh,
I want to welcome everyone tonight, and just as casual and pleasant as this meeting is and as informative, I hope that you will find that the Department of Agriculture, the hemp section, is just that way. It is very important to us to serve the customers, the growers. We say that there's so much about hemp, so much about agriculture that we don't control, we can't control. But the things that we can, the ease of the application process, the ease in getting your questions answered or getting you directed to the right folks, that we can control. And I think it's very important that we work to serve the growers. They have enough to deal with caterpillars and weather and floods and markets, that when you reach out to deal with the department, we want it to be a pleasant experience and give you the information that you need. Was saying that, just a little history. Tennessee was the second state to participate in the pilot project when the bill was signed in 2014. Our program began in 2015, only following Kentucky. So Tennessee has been dedicated to the hemp program since its beginning. And we have the fortunate history of having Annie Self and Katie Kilborn that worked very hard from the beginning of the program. Tennessee's program began slow and steady. People began to become more familiar with hemp. The first few years, there were, in 2015, we had 56 growers, 2016, 39, 2017, 38, 2018, 317, and then came the notorious year 2019, where we had right at 4,000 growers. I want to check real quick those numbers that I gave you. Yeah, let me correct that. 2015 was 49 growers, 2016, 64 growers, 2017, 79, 2018, 226, 2019, the notorious year, had 3,957, and 2020, 1,918. And to date, we have 1,117 licensees in the state to grow hemp. Those first numbers I had given you were sample results. So I wanted to correct that so you get an accurate picture of how the program has grown and how regulation has come and gone and changed. If I had a timeline here in front of you, you would see that there has not been a 6-month period within the years that Tennessee has participated in the hemp program that the rules remained the same. So as you're looking to participate in the program, as you begin to grow, it will be important that you stay close to us, call us whenever you need to, because hemp is such a moving, fluid program. So for 2021, our program has remained much the same as it was operated last year. We continue to only report Delta 9, which is one of the biggest differences between the state of Tennessee and other states. We're one of the few Delta 9 states. But if it goes as we have planned, we will transition to the final rule, the USDA final rule, come January 1. And when that happens, we will transition from Delta 9 reporting to total THC. So that will have a large impact on the program and on our growers as they consider different varieties. The program, as far as our rules and our regulations, whatever is mandated federally and then confirmed with our legislature is how we run the program. There's not a lot of layers of extra rules and regs. I can ask you, are you over 18? If you are, have you had a drug felony in the past 10 years? So if your answer is yes and no to drug felony, then you will be given a hemp license in the state of Tennessee. The application, simply, as many of you know, is just simply name, address, phone number. One of the most important parts is the GPS coordinates. And that is us working with law enforcement. That list is turned over each month to law enforcement, so they have an easily accessible account of all of our hemp growers to aid them and our growers. So that those GPS coordinates and the listing of your growing areas is very important. And as you complete the application, it's important when talking with us, if you have a question or a concern, that you know the name you've put on the application and have your license number. So when you call in, you can quickly give us the name, your license number. We'll be able to pull you up and help you in any way you need. The inspectors come out this year. It's been one inspection, one sample taken. So you will have a relationship with your plant inspectors. And when you receive your license and as you plant your crop and as it's coming into harvest time, it will be important that growers reach out to their inspectors and let them know that. There's also a once a month and more, if necessary, newsletter that we send out to each of our growers. So we try and keep the growers very informed as to what's coming up, what season we're in, any changes, phone numbers, important links, such as to USDA. So you can become familiar with the final rule for yourself. It's posted, it's there for you to read. So you can expect that each month. A newsletter, an update on what to expect with hemp and what's going on with the rules and regs. Like I mentioned, we do plan to transition to the final rule January 1. And the biggest change, like I said, is that going from a Delta 9 state to reporting total THC. So also working with the FSA, Farm Service Agency, we have found that many of our growers aren't familiar with Farm Service Agency. So that is something, there's also a link so you can find the office in your county and become familiar with it. As the final rule goes into effect, a farm number will be necessary. And reporting to FSA will also be very necessary. And that's just how information is gathered, just like with any other commodity crop, corn, soybeans, wheat. Farmers, commodity farmers are used to that procedure. And as hemp just grows up in the program, in the farming community, we too will be working with Farm Service. So that is something to expect. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions? I have one.
Okay.
I have been asked repeatedly about these Delta 9, Delta 8 dynamics. And,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about that today.
Sure. That's a very common question that's on everybody's mind. If you refer to the final rule, if you refer to any of our rules, one of the first things you'll notice is the definition of hemp. And the definition of hemp includes Delta 9. So for the state of Tennessee, currently, we define hemp with a delta 9 of 0.3 or below. Delta 9, 0.3 or below. Anything other than delta 9 is not within that definition of hemp. So it's unregulated. So at this time, delta 8 and all the other delta cousins are unregulated in the state of Tennessee. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yes. I don't know if anyone has a follow-up question at this point before we invite the next speaker.
This is Charles Dark. I have a question. Can you hear me okay? Hi. What is the typical growth season for hemp?
I would say most of our hemp growers plant June, July, and harvest September, October. Now, of course, hemp is not traditional as far as, we have outside and indoor grows. So I was speaking to the outdoor grow.
Okay, thank you. And have you encountered or are there any security issues involved since THC is the principal product and I'm sorry, since CBD is the principal product and not THC?
Right. We do get several notifications that a crop has been stolen or vandalized. So there is a security concern. Possibly because you can't tell the difference by observing or smelling the difference between hemp and marijuana. So yes, I think people have experienced security issues, but we recommend proper security and realizing that people can't tell it apart until they've actually used it. So yes, I would say it's an issue and it's something that new growers need to take into consideration in their business plan.
Great, thank you very much.
Did anyone else have a last question before we move on or comment?
Yeah, if I can ask one question. Hello, can you hear me, Ms.
I
Denise?
can hear you.
Yeah. So what is the Department of Agriculture assessment that why the number of license holder dropped from 3,000 in 2019 to like less than 2,000 in 2020?
Yeah, sure.
Because
There's probably lots of different reasons for that. One of the biggest reasons has to do with how people want to designate growing areas. The smallest amount for a license is 4.99 acres and below. So we have many farmers that will only want to grow, and they know they only want to grow, say, ½ an acre. But so many times, they may have brought plants in at night and they need to just be put in the barn until they're able to plant them in a couple days. Well, unless that barn and the grow area, the actual plot, is licensed, that would be considered, if law enforcement came on the property, that you had hemp in an unlicensed area. So a lot of times farmers, for precaution, will license a larger amount of land than they know they'll actually grow upon, which is a prudent thing to do. So that made a difference. I think as farmers have become more acquainted, seeing how hemp has grown on their farms, they have been able to reduce that amount and make the numbers really more in line with the amount of acres that's actually planted. Not just, you've got a 21 acre farm and you do a circle around all 21 acres. Well, that doesn't mean you're growing 21 acres, that you ever intended to grow 21 acres, but that whole area was a licensed grow area. So wherever on that land hemp was found, it would be licensed and would be compliant. That was an issue, something that probably most folks wouldn't have thought of. And then of course, there's the reason that growing hemp, it's not for sissies. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a journey. I've been told many times that to grow hemp is easy. To grow hemp well is not easy. So I think as people have become more familiar with the crop, the work involved with the crop, not listening to the news and inflated ideals about how much you will make growing hemp on so many acres, as that has faded away and reality has set in, it's normal that the number of acres, I think you would find that across the country, that the number of acres grown has reduced, rightfully so.
Thank you so much. Just addition to that, would you like to share if TDA has any data on CBD market, or like how regulated or how many new processors came to Tennessee? And if you want to share that detail with our farmer.
As you know, our section does not regulate processors. We do not issue a license for processors. So therefore, we don't have that data. I can't tell you as far as a strict CBD oil processors, how many of them are in the state. But in our food and dairy section, which licenses food manufacturing, if CBD is found in any kind of an edible, those are the folks that could really give you the numbers on food manufacturers, food processors that include hemp as an ingredient.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was muted. I'll repeat what I just said. We're going to move on to Steve now, but I also want to recognize the presence of John Kearns. When we were introducing, I didn't see him on the list of the people who had arrived. John, do you just want to say hi and then you'll introduce yourself when it is your turn to speak?
Hi there. Thank you for having me, and I'll defer to the next speaker, and then when it's my turn, we'll get into everything that I've got to say. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So Steve, it's all yours.
All right, Emmanuel and everybody else here. First of all, I appreciated Denise, your approach here as someone involved with the state in Tennessee. So here in Pennsylvania, I'm going to say it this way. For the most part, we've had a very friendly Department of Agriculture. They are seeming to be, I'll say, supporting the farmers. But as you're probably aware too, is you got the federal rule that the states need to comply with. And sometimes you're probably in the proverbial caught between a rock and a hard place. Because some of these rules and regulations in a nascent industry, a new industry, this industry, this whole hemp thing has so much baggage. And there's never anything like it. I don't think I think we'd all agree, there's nothing has come onto the agricultural scene with like this hemp, where it was legal 80 years ago. It was legal everywhere. It was grown all around the world, virtually no issues, no issues. It was a plant that farmers grew just like we grow corn and soybeans now. And then, you know, when the marijuana thing started being selected for it, the whole plant was essentially demonized. And it would be my opinion now, in studying history and reading a little bit more about hemp since I'm involved in it, that there was a lot of, shall I say, shenanigans. There was a lot of behind the scenes that it was more than just marijuana, that they tried to keep this plant out of the people, if you will. I've heard someone say already, outlawing hemp because of marijuana is like outlawing paper because it's used to roll cigarettes. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but it works for me. So I gotta say that in the context, in my experience, my journey, that it's been frustrating, because some things are relatively straightforward and easy, but I gotta tell you, it's been frustrating more so in the last year or so in the context that I'm not only a grower of CBD type hemp, also fiber hemp now, but I'm also have my own brand. If you're interested in looking it up, cedarmeadow.farm, my own brand of CBD and some CBD products. And I'm kind of going to jump ahead of that, then I'm going to back up to the farmer side of it. But the frustrations that we have had to go through is more on the line, more on the end of the banking industry. So you know, the Farm Bill, the USDA part of it, it's legal. We pretty much have our marching orders, so to speak. But it wasn't simultaneous with the banking industry because of this plant's association with the drug marijuana. So to this day, there's not a federal allowance for, so you could say any part of the plant being loaning money for, or even taking credit cards. I'll just give you an example. We did a hemp, our hemp CBD products, where our first, we were probably 2 months into it, and I got a notice from the credit card company that we work with, and actually we had this bank account established, and they said, we're shutting your account down because you're involved with illegal drugs. And I'm just selling CBD. And they give me my money back. It was $2,700. That's what was in the account at that time. No questions, no warning, no nothing. We're closing your account. Here's your money. Okay, well then we had to find another bank, another credit card, which we did, because there are some that are accommodating. It's just an extra thing that I'm not used to dealing with as a farmer. And then those of you who follow me, we started a hemp maze. You've all heard of corn mazes probably. We did a hemp maze. And if you're interested in checking it out, because it might be an idea for some of your people you're working with next year, cedarmeadowadventures.com. There's another hemp maze in Minnesota, but I think we're the second one maybe in the nation that I know of. I think there was one in Tennessee a couple years ago I read about that someone did. But that being said, with the ticketing that we have for our hemp maze, we were rejected right away. Oh, you can't do that. You're violating our company policies. You're involved in the drug business. And this is literally fiber hemp. I mean, there's like virtually no THC in it. Well, we ended up getting a company that worked with us. So I'm just highlighting some of the challenges on that regulatory side that's beyond the farm. And if you're working with any farmers who are either developing their own brand of hemp products, you need to be aware that it's not just a smooth road out there. And not everybody thinks the same way. It depends which bank you talk to. Typically, the community banks, the more regional banks, are open to working with farmers who are growing hemp. I spent 3 hours with the board of directors of a local bank. I had a connection there, and just helping them understand the nuances of growing hemp and so forth. And they basically told their farmers, it's a farmer, there's a lot of agriculture in this bank. They basically told their farmers, we kind of know what you're doing, but we're not going to write it down. If you're in a line of credit and you want to use a line of credit for hemp, don't tell us. And that's kind of weird, you know, but anyway, there's just some things like that right now. It's in that gray area of not sure what to do. And I think we all agree that sooner or later, this road will be paved with the banking side of it. So I just wanted to start with mention some of that. That's kind of fresh on my mind right now. And maybe I'll pause for a second before I get back to the farmer side. Are there any questions with the banking side of things? Maybe you've heard of the experience, or do you have any other questions or comments before I go on from anybody? Just unmute yourself and ask the question, or we'll move on. Anybody?
Hi, this is Charles Dark again. In terms of the banking, I know that I live in California, and I know that it had become a problem because cash is essentially a cash crop. And so that obviously the security and everything that goes with that. Are the banks coming around to accepting hemp growing as a legitimate business and allowing you to bank as you would normally do so? Is that becoming easier?
John, did you have a comment? I saw your hand was up.
I just wanted to mention to the gentleman asking this question, in the state of Tennessee anyway, as you can imagine, that's a fairly conservative place. We get calls from time to time from banks asking for information about how the hemp industry works, how testing works, how these legal thresholds work. So I will say that I'm aware of a lot of banks in the Southeast that are proactively trying to get there for us.
Yeah.
I think they see the scale of the opportunities, particularly in the long term. And I think that probably every institution is at a different level of sort of getting there. I know that Tennesseans have options. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll say the same thing, John, about Pennsylvania. It's typically the smaller banks are trying to figure out how to do this. For instance, the bank that I deal with my farm, they are requiring the state, the COA that we get from the state, indicating that our crop is legal to harvest and to keep. That's what they're requiring. It just covers their butt, so to speak, I believe. And so, you know, it's frustrating for everybody because they're trying to figure out something that nobody really knows what they're figuring out. And it's just, I guess it's kind of like the speed limit analogy right now. You know, when the speed limit says 65, you know, you got a few extra miles per hour over that. And in a way, you know, it's just kind of common knowledge. We're still trying to find out where the speed limit is, if you will, in the whole hemp industry, and especially in the regulatory side of it. So I know that there's bills that have been introduced at the federal level, which is where it's really going to need to be. And the Safe Banking Act, I think, is the name of the one. But I think it's going to happen. But, you know, for me, it's just frustrating. I was shut down a couple times. We got around it, but it's an extra hassle. So, so it might back up now. And as far as regulations in the context of at the farmer level, I do want to talk about regulations on the retail level then too. But so it's been my experience that the regulations in 2020, at least here in Pennsylvania, was that you had to have a 15-day harvest window after you got your, you know, your in-field test. And that was essentially impossible to meet. And everybody recognized that. And here's where, our local state was, I'm just going to say, gracious in that. And I mean, there were some instances where we would get the test and we wouldn't hear the results or the approval from the state until way past the 15 days. So what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to harvest it and then spend all the money and effort and time and harvesting, and then just hope that they give you the approval. And it usually happened, but now it's extended to 30 days this year, and I feel that that's reasonable. Now, I guess the biggest challenge that I've experienced, and as we were waiting here a little bit, I checked on my computer. I have done, I'm a researcher farmer. That's why I know Emmanuel, because we work together on some projects. And I've researched quite a bit into hemp. And I just looked over my file here, and I have done over 175 tests or COAs over the last 3 years. And some of that had to do with looking at fertility and just seeing how that affects CBD content and overall yield and everything. A lot of it actually did in relation to that. But I want to point out that the testing is, I'm going to say, not an exact science. There can be variations. I think we all agree, we all know. But there are some times when you get a test back that's, like a flyer, or it's like that can't be true. That just can't be right. And I've had a couple of them now. For instance, I had a variety in 2019, the first year I grew, that came in at over 1% THC, which is more than triple what we're allowed to have. I'm like, whoa, wow, man. At that time, I didn't have any experience with this variety, but I did know someone who had grown it for years in Colorado, is from Colorado. And they said, that's just not right. That just cannot be right. And so we took subsequent tests of that same variety, and I got 10 tests that I can show you that tested below 0.3 in the very same field, the same genetics. So why did I get one that is 1%? And that happened to be, unfortunately, the one that we sent in for the state. Now in 2019, we were allowed a second test. We were allowed to come back and take a second test. Fortunately, I was able to get approved on that. So that I got lucky, you might say. But on 2020, we didn't have an opportunity here in Pennsylvania for a second test. The only thing they could test the second time was the same sample. They could rerun the sample. And I'll just share an experience I had. So I had a test that was way high. It was like one, it was 0.7. Well, that just throws flags up everywhere. So they retested the same sample and it was over 1%. So it went from 0.7 to 1%. And when you go over 1%, that like puts you in a different category. And I called the lab. I said, how can this happen that the same exact sample goes from 0.7 to, I think it was 1.2. It was a little over 1. Not quite double. How can that happen? Because if we're supposed to trust the testing, and it goes 100% or 80% over what the original test was, it's just it's very frustrating. And that small, happened to be a small batch of seed or of biomass, had to be destroyed. And it was just, and then I took a subsequent test, which would have been 7 days later, and it was 0.27. So, but that didn't count because the rule stated you have to go by that first test you take. So these are some of the things that, we're dealing with in that regard. Now, I've also had quite a bit of consistency in other times, lots of tests I've done. And, I told you I did over 150 of them. And, you know, you get to the point where you kind of know the range of where it should be based on subsequent testing and everything. But there hasn't seemed to be I guess a channel, if you will, for some of these wild readings you get once in a while. And so that's been a frustration for me. So having said all that, you know, as a farmer, I've never had to come under this type of scrutiny before in any of my crops that I grow. So it's been kind of a new dynamic, if you will. And I think because I believe in the crop, I believe in the future of the crop, I do believe that things will get more streamlined. Question earlier, why did a lot of people drop out from 2019? 2019 was the euphoria year. We were all going to make $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 an acre. And the worst case scenario, we were still going to be better than growing any other crop. Well, it turned out worse than the worst case scenario by the end of the year. And so the price just tanked. And I will echo what someone said earlier, that hemp is easy to grow, but it's difficult to grow well. That was very well stated. And so there's a lot of dynamics why there's a lot less people growing, but one of the big reasons is for a farmer who grows the biomass and doesn't take it out to to tinctures or retail type products, to this day, it's the price of the biomass is at or below the cost of production. So that's very much of a disincentive, you might say, for any farmer who's just growing the biomass. And then, some farmers have gotten disenchanted by some of this testing, by some of the rules and regulations. They're just like, I'm not putting up with that. I'm not used to it. I'm not going to do it. And so that's, part of that. So maybe I'll pause here for a second before I want to touch on the retail end of it. Are there any questions or your experiences on the farmer side? I mean, I kind of spend most of my time being a little negative here. I don't mean to be negative, but I just hope you hear what I'm trying to say is there's still a few things to work out in this. I think they will be worked out, but is there any questions or comments on what I just said about more on the farm end of the regulations?
Hi, this is Charles again. Steve, thank you for that information. Is growing hemp water dependent? Is the need for water a serious issue?
So it is, I'm going to put it this way, somewhat drought tolerant because of its very aggressive root system. That being said, this is where the category comes in. Anybody can grow hemp, but to maximize the plant, the potential of the plant, you should have irrigation to be able to do that. One of the topics that I cover in one of my other webinars, you'll cover that. So it's a high value crop. The answer I would say is it should have water, but I can tell you too, in areas that typically have excessive moisture, that can be somewhat detrimental to hemp. You can get botrytis in the buds. So a dry climate with irrigation, I would have to say would be sort of ideal. At least dry when it's nearing the end of its life cycle. So I don't want to get too much into that because we're talking about regulations today. But
right.
Anyway, just that's a little teaser for one of the other webinars coming up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Steve.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about the farming side of regulations? So if not, let's talk about the retail side of regulations. And actually, that's pretty easy because there are none. There are none. There's no regulations on the retail side. It's just bizarre. It's bizarre to me that, I take my CBD, I get it extracted, my biomass, I get it extracted, I put it in bottles, I sell it. There's no regulations. And this I'm going to say is the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA's problem. They've been dragging their feet for 3 years now to try to put some regulations on the retail side of it. And, you know, there's a lot of excuses, and I'm going to call them excuses. I'm going to call it like it is, like I see it anyway, that this hemp plant, I understand that it hasn't been legal and not even legal to research, you know, for a lot of years. And I understand the need for research, and I support that. I get that. But, you know, there's a lot of things out there that are under the category of generally recognized as safe. GRAS is a term that is used. And why isn't at least they give that definition in a broad area of for these hemp products? I also understand the dynamic of the marijuana and the THC, and I get that. But the thing that is frustrating to me, it makes good people look bad in our industry when you have, and I know of three occasions now where there was CBD tested that was in stores and it had 0 CBD in it. It was just coconut oil. But they do it because they can. It's, you know, there's no regulations out there. I don't think that's rampant, but, and I know it's not rampant, but that's frustrating. That's bad for the industry. And I wish somehow, and I know there's, you know, some of the organizations that have some, I'll say, clout, are really trying to push the FDA to at least get something out there. We don't need a full-blown program yet, but at least get something out there. And currently, you know, I was maybe a little bit over the top when I said there are no regulations. Because if you start making claims that CBD will do this and CBD will do that, or hemp extract does this, then the FDA might slap your hand. It's done that for you know, a dozen or more companies over the last couple years. Because again, and I understand that because there's claims that people want to make, and they may have anecdotal evidence, may or may not be true. But this is why we need, I feel we do need some common sense regulation on the retail side. At least that they could test the products and you know, I would welcome that now as a retailer, as one who's vertically integrated. I have my own products. I would welcome a testing of my product. I don't have to show anything to anybody to sell CBD. I could sell it to all you guys in the call here, and you could go out and sell it on your street corner if you want. You don't have to get a permit or anything to do it. It's bizarre when you think about it. But so anyway, maybe I've spoken enough about that. I'll just pause here. Any comments or questions on the regulatory side, on the retail side of, you know, we're talking about hemp products here today. I have more to share, but I want to stop a little bit to see what your thoughts may be, or comments or questions.
This is Charles again. I just have one comment. Wow. Wow.
Hey, correct me if I'm wrong. If anybody thinks I've misrepresented this, I'd love to hear it. But you know, I've been in the industry long enough. Go ahead.
So thank you very much, Steve. I'm more curious about knowing the 2022 regulation in the light of interim regulation passed by the USDA. I think lots of farmers across the state has challenged so many regulations, the testing regulations, but how a farmer who is going to start in 2022, he should be prepared, or like what, how, yeah, that's
well, just like Emmanuel's having these series of webinars here, you got to get educated. So if a farmer is going to jump in this here, and I've had in the past 2 years, I've asked, you know, many farmers have asked me, should they get involved in the hemp? and I, when they ask the question, I say no. And that gets their attention. But I say only if you're willing to put the effort into educating yourself about everything. And that includes the growing and the, who is your buyer? There's not an infrastructure set up yet. We got the cars, but we have very little roads, if you will, especially in the fiber side of hemp. There's just not the infrastructure set up yet. So it's too soon to get in a big way. But if you believe in the crop and you believe that it's going to be a future, sure, start small, grow an acre or two of fiber or a couple plants or a quarter acre of CBD or whatever your state allows the minimum. Absolutely do that. But it's easy to grow hemp, but it's very difficult to do it in a way that you can make money from it right now. So the industry is just starting to mature. I think I can say that. I have learned a tremendous amount here in the last 3 years I've been involved. But see, I was following hemp since 1999. That's when I was first kind of intrigued by it. Now, 21 years have passed, and there's some years I probably didn't really do any self-educating. But from 2017 on, when I thought it was going to become legal, I was starting to get myself informed. And even with that information that I have now experienced 4 contracts that have been, I'll say, broken. They just never came to be. And, fortunately, it wasn't a big deal to me. And it's just like, well, it is what it is. But contracts with hemp right now are not worth much more than the paper they're written on. I had a neighbor come up to me and said, hey, there's this guy. He said that he's going to guarantee that I make $1,000 an acre, and he's going to supply me with the seed. And he said, what do you think about that, Steve? And I said, big red flag, big red flag. Do you have anything else in agriculture? Does anybody come to you and offer you a guaranteed payment per acre? I'm not saying that hasn't worked, but very rarely does it. I would never do that. I'm just saying from my experience, I would never do that. So there's still people out there trying to do that, and maybe it's okay, but man, I just be very careful with that. You really got to study it. You really got to educate yourself and talk to other farmers who are already doing what you want to do, who are already growing the type of hemp that you want to grow. That's probably your best bet. And, this group here, be involved in groups, be involved in wherever you can, go to conferences, go to meetings. You have to educate yourself. But I got to be very quick to say that there is a lot of misinformation flying around, a lot, more so than I've ever seen before. And because for the people who know the most about this crop, if we're honest, are those who have been growing marijuana. And those grows are very small. They may even be in the basement of a house. They may be in a greenhouse, and it doesn't apply to outdoor growing. Not a lot doesn't apply. And so I've kind of, I take everything I hear with a grain of salt. And then just try to prove it to myself. Because I've read books, I've listened to people talk, I've listened to podcasts, I've watched videos. And, what I've experienced here in my farm, more so than not, was that it was, I got to figure this out. I'll tell you one thing, and I mentioned this in a couple of my webinars, and this is maybe a little bit deviating from our topic today, but if you know how to grow tomatoes, there's a lot of similarities of hemp and tomatoes, and the fertility, taking care of it, the way you manage nitrogen, the way you manage potassium, the way you manage disease. Tomato farmers are the best farmers to grow hemp. We had a group of about 50 Amish farmers that banded together and formed a group, and I was called in to consult for them. And about 2/3 were vegetable farmers and about 1/3 were dairy farmers. I'll just tell you, I got very, very few calls from the vegetable farmers, but a lot of calls from the dairy farmers. You know, they heard of drip irrigation and stuff like that, but they had no clue how to do it, you know, and different things like that. And
That's true. Yeah.
so, you know, vegetable farmers are definitely a step or two ahead simply because it's grown more like a vegetable. The CBD varieties. Now the fiber varieties would be more like a commodity type farmer probably. And I've grown them both now. So that's just a little bit of a perspective on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, other questions or comments?
Steve, a question about, you mentioned the fiber side of the product, and I've noticed in grocery stores lately that I see hemp seeds.
Yes.
Is that the fiber, what you're referring to as the fiber side?
So yes and no. So I'm going to just back up a second here so we all understand, you know, the plant hemp, or maybe the better term would be cannabis. And even people define hemp different, people define cannabis different. But cannabis is more the Latin term that covers all the variations of hemp. You know, you have your CBD, you have your fiber, you have your seed type hemp, and it's just like corn. We're all familiar with corn. You have popcorn, you have sweet corn, you have field corn for animals. It's all been bred to meet certain needs. So CBD hemp never really is meant for seed production. Never. It just isn't. Just like popcorn is never meant to feed animals. Okay, it's not. There's no crossover. Fiber and seed is more like, if you're familiar with corn, is more like grain corn and silage corn. They both can be used for both. They tend to be planted thicker, long, slender stalks, and a lot of them what we call dual purpose varieties, where they sometimes they'll cut they'll harvest the seeds from the top, and then they'll take the stalks for fiber, and they'll use both the seeds and the fiber. If a plant is more bred for seed production, it tends to be shorter. If it's for fiber, it tends to be taller. So that's just some of the characteristics out there. And, you know, while we're talking about regulations, this is another beef I have. You know, fiber hemp or seed hemp has very, very, very low THC. It's rare to find THC going over, although it can sometimes. But in my fiber hemp here tested 0.08, so that's well below the 0.3. So I guess I'm just trying to say that in the context here of the different genetics that are out there, the fiber type varieties tend to have a very low THC anyway. They don't tend to be an issue with that dynamic. So was that helpful there, Charlie, in explaining that?
Yes, that was. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
I know my time's about up, Emmanuel. Is there any other regulation or regulatory questions that I could weigh in on? Anybody has?
Yeah, does anyone have any other comments? Just when you mentioned about contracts being worth the paper it's written on, that's very true. I have experienced that personally. And someone offered us seed, very expensive seed. You know, you guys know how expensive CBD hemp seed, feminized seeds are. So we were like, someone is not going to spend that much money on seed and fail to come and purchase the produce at the end of the year. And they did. They did not honor their contract.
Yep.
That was very disappointing. Anyway, like you said, Steve, the most important thing for those of you who have not grown hemp before is you want to take advantage of these webinars. Steve has been offering them at a cost. We are offering them here for, Steve has been very kind enough to let me offer these webinars that he took a whole year, maybe more, to put together. And if you can take advantage of this, if you are one of those growers who is here who has not grown hemp before and you're aspiring towards growing it or has grown it, like Danny said before, growing hemp is one thing, growing it well is something else. So if you don't go through this process to teach yourself everything you need to know, maybe it's not a very good idea to grow hemp. But now we have this opportunity to learn about hemp. Next week, we're going to be talking about the 7 things every first-time grower should know. It will be a recording from Steve. Maybe Steve, you want to say very quickly about what's about, and then we'll move on to John.
Well, Emmanuel, I forget what those 7 things are.
Okay.
So I know that I covered some of them here tonight. You know, the big thing that comes to my mind right away is you need to be educated. You need to educate yourself.
Yeah.
That's probably the most important thing. And you know, what is your objective? What type of hemp are you growing? What is your market? And I know one thing's, you know, if you're talking to someone about buying your product, if at all possible, meet them in person, if at all possible, because emails and phone calls, you can have a great sounding person at the other end, and they may have their best intentions, but oh boy, it's this industry is, there's more bad deals than there are good deals.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you have to acknowledge. You know, for me as a lifelong multi-generational farmer, you know, we kind of know who we can trust and who we can't trust in the agricultural circles. And for the most part, farmers trust farmers. But I got to tell you, this industry here is a crossover of a bunch of different aspects from different backgrounds, and I don't understand where some people are coming from. You know, their even their culture. You know, and it's just sometimes it's just difficult to get on the same page, and then you know how to trust them. So that's one of the things I bring out, to you know, try to meet them. And I got to tell you, I have most of the contracts that I was with, all of them was good people. It was good people. It's just that they struggled as well and just could not come through for various reasons. Money issues, running out of money. Oh my goodness. And you just can't go to the bank. Like I said before, you can't. You have to go with private equity, private funding, or how deep is your pockets? You know, how much money do you have? And that's what happened a lot of times, is they run out of money, or the market turns, or the market they had is no longer there. So I would say, from my experience, it was good people that I researched. And that's why, you know, I just kind of let it go. You know, there was no reason to sue them or anything like that. It just wasn't necessary, because I understood some of their stories. You know, I got it, you know, I understood it. But and that actually, in a way, that forced me to get my own brand started sooner than I expected to. Because I thought I need to be full control here from actually the breeder to the shelf. That's really what I'm involved in doing now. So maybe that's a good way to end it here today, Manuel.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. Thanks so much for that enlightening talk about what we are facing and what we are likely to face, and the importance of preparedness. And we've talked about testing quite a bit, and we have the testing guru here, John. He works with a New Bloom, and John is going to introduce himself and talk to us about testing. I hope John's presentation is going to answer some of the questions that you raised.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Emmanuel and Anand. I appreciate being able to speak with you guys in recent weeks, and thank you for the work that you're doing, not only in research, but in getting good information out there. My name is John Kearns. I'm the co-founder and CEO of New Bloom Labs. We have facilities both in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and in Dallas, Texas. We started New Bloom. My brother and I started New Bloom Labs in 2019. And, you know, our story wasn't that different than what a lot of folks experienced in 2019. There was this great excitement, a lot of fervor around the promise of hemp. We recognize the same thing, but our way to participate and be a part of the future of this plant was to establish New Bloom Labs. And so here we are now, a couple years later, and everything looks entirely different than it did in 2019. But that's not entirely a bad thing. That is that I think, as Steve so eloquently put it, we're a more mature industry now, but we've still got a long way to go. And so if it's okay, Emmanuel, I'd like to share my screen. I do have some slides I'd like to go through.
Go ahead. Is it letting you share?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, can you guys see it?
Not yet.
How about now?
And now I sing it.
Okay, great. Let me get presented here. All right. So I'm going to go through quite a few slides, but I'm going to go fast. And a lot of what I'm going to present for you guys is both, I'm going to present some data, but a lot of this is going to be anecdotal. We sit as a testing lab in a pretty unique spot in the hemp supply chain, in that we interact with everyone up and down the supply chain. And so we learn a lot about the industry, and we also hear a lot of stories. And I think a lot of what we know is valuable to anyone who's researching this crop. But testing is critical for a lot of reasons. The first and foremost is legal compliance. That's the very unique thing about hemp, is it is a cannabis plant, and we have very strict and sometimes very penal criminal codes around the possession, consumption, and trade of cannabis in this country. No matter what you think of those laws, and I have my own opinions, that is the reality. And so testing is an important part, is the most critical part of remaining legally compliant if you're going to cultivate hemp. Then, of course, you also have the quality control of the products that you're producing. And then, also equally important, I would say, to legal compliance is the consumer safety aspect, which is just to say that you want to make sure that what you're producing is free of toxins. Really quickly, I'm going to go through each of these. Compliance testing. Steve talked about that official test he takes before he goes to market. That's that state mandated or USDA mandated test. Thankfully, now we do have that 30-day harvest window from the sampling to when harvest is due. States will use various sampling schemes. These are usually private companies or licensed individuals that you will call, and they will come and sample your crops. Sometimes some states are still using government employees to do that work. I think because of the state of hemp production now, most states are realizing that that's cost prohibitive, and so they're outsourcing it. This is usually a costly test because of what it takes to sample and ship your hemp. So for instance, in Tennessee, we have farmers that are being charged hundreds of dollars for their official test. The testing portion of that is only $50. In fact, we do that test. So, but they may get a bill for $260, but the rest of that $210 is travel, sampling, labor, and transport. So that's where those fees come from. Of course, the biggest factor, the biggest thing you need to know about compliance testing is the all-important 0.3% total THC legal threshold. Then there's private testing, again, for compliance. This is where you monitor your crop to make sure that it is maturing as predicted for the genetics that you source. As far as your own private testing, we would always advise you to use the United States Postal Service. In our experience, both FedEx and UPS are hostile to the hemp industry. I will say very recently that seems to be evolving and changing for the better, but nevertheless, it is always going to be your best practice to use the Postal Service until something really seriously changes. And most growers at this point are still monitoring their potency during the flowering part of the grow. And for this private testing, you can use any lab that you want, although we would encourage you to choose wisely. I can tell you that not every lab is created equal. Consumer safety, and this is what sometimes gets called the full panel test, the big test. It's the one that's more expensive. This is where you're going to screen for pesticides and mycotoxins, metals, different microbials and molds, and residual solvents if you're producing extracted material. This testing is more expensive because it's a whole lot more expensive to produce the report. The instrumentation necessary, the laboratory consumables, and the level of technician required to conduct this sort of testing is just a different level. And so it is by natural extension more expensive. Then you have quality control testing. Again, you can use a potency test for this because when we do a potency test, we're not just looking at THC and CBD. We're looking at any number of different cannabinoids, depending on the laboratory. And you can really craft some unique products around different cannabinoids. Same thing with terpenes. These molecules that are responsible for sort of the consumer experience that you get, how the hemp will taste or smell, that has a lot to do with how consumers really experience the plant. Does it give them energy? Does it make them sleepy or whatnot? And you can craft some really interesting and unique products by using these two sorts of tests here. So let's talk about the USDA final rule. This is the biggest news in the hemp industry since the 2018 Farm Bill, and it's a pretty controversial document. But my read on it really in the end is that it's very accommodating to growers. And here's what I mean. There are three sort of important parts of this final rule that when taken together give growers a great deal of grace. The first is whole plant sampling. So the USDA has a very strict SOP about how to collect plant material for a compliance test. And that collection uses the top 6 inches of a plant and includes all parts of the plant. This has the effect of lowering the potency of that final test. We also have the 30-day harvest window. So your plants can be maturing in their grow location. You can take a test, you can pass your compliance test, and then from sample date to when harvest due, you have a full 30 days for those cannabinoids to continue producing. And then in the event that you do have a hot test, if you will, you have options for retesting and remediation through the USDA final rule. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the USDA final rule is a federal bare minimum of standards. Some states have higher or more strict standards than the ones that I'm speaking to here. You would have to investigate that on a state-by-state basis. I do want to make one important note about the DEA. Probably the most important, the most controversial part of the USDA final rule is that laboratories have to be DEA registered. As an operator and owner of a lab, I don't have much of a problem with that. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I've been through the DEA inspection process, I've registered and I'm certified with the DEA. I can tell you what the DEA is concerned with, and it's not how hot your material is. They want to know that the security in our laboratory is good and sound. They want to make sure that in the event that we do have a controlled substance on our property, that some employee isn't going to walk off with it or that we're disposing of it correctly. That is the sum total of what the DEA is concerning itself with. We do not report your test results to the DEA. The DEA has never asked us to do so. So I think there's a little bit of undue worry around that part of it. Now, of course, things could change down the road, and maybe this becomes more controversial than it already is. But my general advice to folks is don't worry about that part of it, because there is nothing that is disadvantageous to growers and producers as it relates to the DEA that's going on in practice at all. So let's talk about these three parts of the USDA rule that are advantageous. These are pictures that I took of in our laboratory this morning. On the left is a private test wherein we're really only testing the cola of the plant. On the right is a whole plant sample. Now, which one of these is more likely to pass? I'm sure it's obvious to everyone that the one on the right is very, very likely to pass because this is a whole plant sample. You can see how much stem, how many fan leaves are in there. Very commonly, we'll see seeds. And other biomass. This is a biomass sample that has the effect of lowering the cannabinoid, including THC potency of the sample that we've taken. On the left, if we only sample that flower, those numbers are going to come up, and they're going to come up significantly. Again, this is an extension of grace to the producer on the part of the USDA. Then the 30-day harvest window, I talked about this a little earlier, but on day one, you take the sample, you get your COA back, but you don't have to harvest for another 30 days from the day the sample was taken. Again, very advantageous to hemp growers. Okay, so how are we doing in the real world? So I pulled the numbers from New Bloom Labs, and we do official testing for about 12 or 13 states right now. There are about eight that we do a lot of this testing for. So in 2020, our official testing had a 12% fail rate. Now that's nationally, that's not just in Tennessee. In 2021, we had an 8. We are so far, as of yesterday, have an 8% fail rate. So what are the two main reasons for that? In our experience, now again, this is anecdotal, but the two main reasons for crop failure are inexperience and bad genetics. Inexperience just means that this is a grower who hauled off and grew a great deal of hemp, or maybe grew a small amount of hemp, and wasn't really mindful of how THC matures in their plant over time. And then the other is bad genetics. And I really want to talk about this for just a second, because as Steve said, there are a lot of scoundrels out there in this industry, and there are a lot of folks selling seeds and that aren't what they're purported to be. And I know too many of my customers that have struggled with this issue in their experience. And luckily, it's not most of them, but it does happen. So be incredibly careful, do your research, and be careful about where you are sourcing your genetics. One other quick note, Texas started its hemp program a year after. They started in 2020, and it really struggled with compliance in 2020. We do a lot of official tests in Texas, and the fail rate was way too high in Texas. Luckily, it's improved this year, but I think this was a combination of its opening year in hemp production, and then also some bad genetics were out there in Texas last year. Okay, so best testing practices. Look, I'll tell you first what the textbook tells you to do, which is pre-planting. You want to test your metals and waters you want to test your soil and water for pesticides and metals. During cultivation, you want to monitor the potency of your plants. Pre-harvest, you want to continue monitoring. At post-harvest, you want to get a full panel on every lot. If you're storing hemp, you want to regularly check the potency and the mold and mycotoxin screenings of that material. And at sale, your buyer may demand a recent test. And that's what the textbook tells you. And it's good advice. However, you can and should right-size your testing program to your business's needs. Some producers rightfully need to test that much, others do not. For instance, we have producers that have been growing the same genetic in the same spot, same general spot on their property for 3 years now, and they kind of know what to expect. They don't test as much. But I will tell you, if it is ever your first experience with a new genetic, I would encourage you to engage in robust in-grow testing to make sure that those cannabinoids are developing as you would expect. Another big one is sampling. Steve was talking about getting sometimes some variance in his results. I can tell you that 90% of variance in results comes down to sampling. Sometimes it's the grower sampling technique, and sometimes it's sampling that occurs in the lab. But the actual material that ends up in an instrument for analysis, selecting that in a consistent way will yield consistent test results over time. So write a very strict SOP about how you are sampling your material. Do it every time and make sure you're training all of your employees to the same. And that will promote more consistent testing and an easier testing program for you and your business. Okay, really quickly on shipping your hemp, I talked about this a little earlier, but always use the Postal Service. Again, FedEx and UPS are pretty hostile to our industry still. Include the correct documents. Complete the order form completely. Throw in your hemp license and a shipping manifest if your state requires that. And use the correct vessels for storage. So a lot of times we get flour material in plastic bags. Please avoid that and use a breathable paper bag. We can provide, New Bloom Labs is happy to provide those materials for you for free. Okay, so how do you pick a lab? Well, not every lab is created equal. I told you that earlier. ISO 17025 and DEA certified are the bare minimum standards in our industry. Any lab that you're using should at least have those two. Also, how transparent is your lab? Can you get a hold of the lab staff? Who analyzed your material? Can you get help interpreting results? Will they send you the raw data off of the instrument that you can compare that to your COA? And then what's their turnaround time? The number one complaint among hemp producers is slow turnaround. I know friends in the industry now that have used other labs and they're waiting 2 and 3 weeks for results currently. In this industry, that kind of turnaround can be fatal. Okay. So how much do you send for testing? It's really pretty simple. 3 grams or milliliters for any individual test. If you're going to do a full panel, send 25 grams or milliliters. That's pretty straightforward. This is what 3 grams dry looks like in your hand. It looks like you're holding a couple of pieces of popcorn. One question we get a lot, can you send it wet? We recommend green is fine, but not dripping wet. So if you take a sample, leave it out indoors overnight, then package it and send it. That should be plenty dry. Your certificate of analysis, I'm not going to go deep into this, but I'm going to provide this PDF for everyone participating on the call. But this graph just generally goes down how you can break down a COA. Again, I told you New Bloom Labs is happy to provide sampling kits for you. You just go to our website and request one of these and we'll get it out to you next day. But it includes all of these materials that just make your sampling and testing program a lot easier for you. So just a note about our lab, we really pride ourselves on turnaround time. Most every test that you're going to get from us, you're going to get back in 1 business day. The one exception being the microbials test. That's a 3 to 4 test because we have to grow a culture for that. So just another couple quick slides here. Okay, some final thoughts on success. Look, don't do this alone. Join your state organization. For us in Tennessee, we have the Tennessee Growers Coalition and the Tennessee Cannabis Business Alliance. Look, unless you participate in these public policy groups, you can expect your legislature and your departments of agriculture to deliver bad rules. These legislators rely on you in this industry to help them craft regulations that are fair and that promote our industry. And everyone should be rolling up their sleeves to that effort. Find a mentor and join a group. This is sort of slowed down in the era of COVID-19, but there are lots of county or city hemp groups that you can join, be a part of their happy hours or their information sessions. You can gain a lot of information that way about best practices. And guys, yes, test smart, but don't cut that corner. But a good lab should be able to be honest with you about what your testing needs are and what they're not. You shouldn't be oversold testing. Some folks need a lot of it, some don't. But there is probably a base level of good practice around testing. You're welcome to call me or New Bloom Labs. We'll be happy to walk you through that. And finally, I just want to reiterate again how important it is to carefully source those genetics. There's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of bad COAs, a lot of forged COAs out there that some unsavory characters are more than happy to pass off to you in order to make a sale. Okay, I have one more thought. I think I just owe it to the group to bring this up. We've got to talk about Delta-8. It is the hottest cannabinoid in hemp at the market, and it is a bit of a problem. And I have no problem with anyone choosing to consume Delta-8 if that's what they want. But the problem is that many laboratories are really bad at analyzing these products. And there are a lot of false negative Delta-9 THC results in these COAs. And that can land you in very serious legal jeopardy. I'm not going to go deep into this, but we see 2 graphs here. The one on the left is a well-developed analytical method that is yielding clear results. The one on the right is not. Unfortunately, in our industry, more labs are producing what you're seeing on the right than on the left. Guys, make no mistake, when it comes to Delta-8, law enforcement is watching and they're interested in what's going on here. And unfortunately, New Bloom Labs has gained new customers after they were already under indictment. So please be careful. D8 is it's a fine substance. It's a fine business. A lot of folks are doing really well with it. Just choose your labs carefully, and make sure that you're producing in a careful and an ethical way. With that, I'll just simply say thank you to Emmanuel and Anand and his colleagues. Thank you for having me. I'll be happy to field any questions that you may have.
Thanks so much, John. That was very enlightening. Maybe we'll be inviting you every week to give that presentation. That's pretty well stated. I don't know if people have questions or comments. We have 3 minutes to do that. I just wanted to have a very quick one because we will be sending samples to you here very shortly.
Okay.
How long? How long can you keep samples in the fridge safely without the risk of breaking things down?
Yeah, so our SOP is that we destroy samples after 5 business days. Now, there are a few reasons for that. Simple logistics and storage being one of them. It's not practical for us to hold onto these materials for weeks on end. But we keep them for 5 days in the event that one of our customers wants to call, has a question about results. We might be motivated or maybe get requested for a retest. We want to be able to accommodate that within reason. So we keep materials for 5 days. Now, earlier I mentioned the DEA. The DEA requires that we destroy any non-compliant material same day. So if you send us an oil or a plant material that's high in THC, we are mandated by law to go ahead and destroy that.
Yeah. All right. Thanks very much. Just a question, I believe, from Dr. Dark. Did you want to say to ask?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was not a question. It was just a comment. This was so enlightening. I really appreciate all of your comments.
Sure. And I'll be happy to share this PDF with Emmanuel and Anand, and they can distribute to everyone on the call.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Just one question, if I can ask. We have.
Yeah, go ahead and ask.
Yeah. Thank you very much, John. It was really informative. We would like to have you again sometime so we can talk in more details. I was just asking, would you suggest that to avoid the compliance failure, farmers should go for like 30-day harvest window period? They should go for private testing so they can know the pattern or development of THC. So rather than destroying their crop, they can save it or they can do early harvest. Is it possible or economically viable?
Yeah, I mean, that's without question the best practice, particularly, again, if it's your first time cultivating a particular genetic that you've selected, right? The standard advice for years has been once your plants start flowering, run a potency test every week. For a lot of folks that are now experienced in cultivating this crop, that might be a little heavy-handed. I would say that if it's a genetic that you are familiar with, get 2 to 3 mid-grow potency tests, maybe just a couple, so that you have in your mind, okay, where am I in THC production, and when should I call my sampler for that compliance test? All it does is allow you to put together a plan for your compliance sample, and then 15 to 30 days after that, harvest, right? So it's about knowing when to sort of pull that trigger. And that's important. Otherwise, you're just guessing.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much. That's
sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you. I don't want to keep you here beyond the 7 p.m. that we said we would be finishing. I would like to encourage you to keep coming. And if you know neighbors or friends who are interested in knowing how to grow hemp or who wants to be involved in the hemp enterprise in one way or another, encourage them to come to these webinars. They are very informative, and you will be a better hemp grower or hemp enterprise person in 2022 when you are now ready to jump in. I know that there are 75 growers registered for these webinars, even though very few were able to come today. Hopefully we will be able to see more of the growers showing up in subsequent webinars. For now, I just want to thank you all, and we will give you copies of, I have recorded this presentation, we will give you copies of the SAM And also John's presentation, we'll be able to share those with you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.